Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So as you know, I like to look through the comments and answer as many questions as I can. And one of the questions I get a lot is, how do you do this hack if you have a sub that only has RCA level inputs? And the good news is there's actually a pretty easy solution. You can buy these converters here. These are a speaker to line level or RCA signal converter. So you can just buy one of these. I picked this one up at Best Buy. They have them in stock in the car audio section. It's $15. And if you look at it, it's a really simple box. On one side here, you have the RCAs. And so that's the output of this device. And around the other side, there's actually two little potentiometers. So that will let you adjust the levels between the channels. And the way you get a signal into this thing is there are these various wires in the back here. So there's a pair of wires to accept the positive and negative for the left channel, a pair of wires for positive and negative on the right channel, and there's actually two wires for grounding. And that's going to be helpful for isolating noise and hum and all sorts of other baddies. And so that's pretty straightforward. But then as I was working on this, I kind of had this idea. What if I used this speaker level input to grab the signal from the tweeter and the woofer and then somehow mash them together to get a full range signal? Because that would answer the other big question people have been asking me about is there a way to get a really cheap line out from using this hack? So in this video, we're going to change course and we're going to find out whether we can use this technique to get ourselves a really cheap line out from our Sonos. All right, so once I had the tweeter and woofer wired up to this converter, it was time to have some fun, test things out. So what we need is a cable like this. This is an RCA cable that connects to a stereo 1/8 inch cable. And just going to go ahead here and plug this into the converter. So just the left and the right channel here. And then on this other side with the headphone jack, for our first test, let's go ahead and test a Bluetooth speaker because that'll be real easy. All right, so for this test, I'm going to use my Bang & Olufsen A1 Bluetooth speaker and just plug this headphone jack right into the aux input on that. And the cool thing with this whole technique is I can actually then use these little dials on the side here with a tiny screwdriver to adjust the levels for the woofer and tweeter signal. All right, with that, let's fire this up and see how it sounds. So this is the dials both turned all the way up. And just turn the tweeter all the way down. You can just hear the woofer signal. Now just turning the tweeter back up. Now just turning the woofer down. So this is just the tweeter signal. Turn that back up. And that's both all the way up. I think the overall presentation is very bass heavy, so I would recommend turning the bass down a bit if you mess around with this. Yikes. All right, so next up we want to go ahead and test this to see how high fidelity this really is. So I brought it upstairs to my much better setup. So I have a Peachtree audio amp and a pair of KEF LS50s, but really the same general setup here. We're going to go ahead and take our converter and we're going to plug in a pair of RCA cables. And you'll see, because we're listening to the fancy system, they're gold plated. But really none of that's going to matter because we're going to do something super un-high fidelity. So the special thing that we have to do here is combine, again, those two RCA signals into one. So in this case, I need this kind of a cable that has two female RCA plugs on one end and a male RCA in the other that I can plug into my amplifier. And you might be wondering, hey, is it safe to kind of smush these two things together? Won't those hurt the amps? My answer to that is I'm not quite sure. My guess is that because this is just a signal, it's really not going to cause any sort of a short, but do this at your own risk. And I also need to turn off the internal drivers in the Symfonisk speakers. We don't want to hear those. And then just plug everything into the amp and fire it up. And so for this test, what I decided to do is just run pink noise from the Sonos into these speakers. Now, pink noise, if you're not familiar, is basically the sound of all the frequencies being played at the same amplitude. So essentially you want a straight line all the way across, which represents a really neutral, flat response. In this case, we're not going to quite get there. So you can see here, got it fired up. Now this is the resulting effect. So I'm measuring this on my iPad with this Spectrum Analyzer app. And you can see it's relatively flat, but there is a decent little hump there in the mid bass. And there's definitely a bit of a suck out. It's around 2 to 4 kilohertz, which is not great. I think that's around where the crossover is. So maybe there's some weird interference happening. All right, so this is the tweeter alone. You can see what that curve looks like. And you can see that sloping curve as it gets lower and lower. And that's the active crossover in action. And if we just fire up the woofer, you can see, again, it's a pretty ragged response. But on the high end, you see that is a pretty nice even roll off. And you can see when you put these things back together again, that's the response. All right, so tests aside, how did this thing really sound? So I played a bunch of music tracks with it, and I think my overall impression is that it just kind of sounds meh. There's not a lot of detail. It's a little bit muddy. And, it just sounds, in a word, reconstituted. And I think that's because it has been reconstituted. We started out with this as a nice clean signal. It was amplified up. And then we used this relatively low quality box to squish that amplified signal back down into a much smaller signal. And then that gets sent to this amplifier and then re-amplified again. So we're playing essentially a game of telephone here. So, overall, I would say this is honestly not worth it. It might be okay in a pinch, but it's really not going to be any sort of a replacement for a true solution like a Sonos Connect. And even if this did work better, I don't know if I'd use it because I'm still not sure if this is causing any stress on the amps. And the other thing is I'm also confident that it would be really hard to keep a good signal to noise ratio going here. So in general, I wouldn't advise using this, but it was a fun experiment. And for folks out there that don't have speaker level inputs on their sub, this little adapter is still a great little tool. And you may be saying, well, if it didn't sound that hi-fi, why would I use that for my sub? But I really feel like for low frequencies, you're not going to notice the more subtle loss of fidelity here. This thing is still going to bump and shake. So I would not worry about that at all. So if you have a sub that doesn't have speaker level inputs like this Energy sub here, just go ahead, grab this adapter, plug it in, and I think you'll be really happy. All right, everyone. Well, that's it for this video. Hope this answered some more questions about line level outputs. The answer is no. And how to connect a sub that doesn't have speaker level inputs. The answer is yes. Just grab one of these adapters. So thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos over the next few weeks. Thanks. Bye.